Into item 7, the Christchurch Wastewater Treatment Plant Recovery Update. So if I could invite the relevant staff to the table, please. And the way this will run, we've got a presentation from staff, then we'll move to questions from elected members, and then obviously we've got resolutions that we will look at, get a mover and seconder, and then we'll move into any debate. So welcome staff to the table. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we're in your hands with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Adam this morning, who is the manager and looks after our wastewater treatment plant. So the Christchurch Wastewater Treatment Plant and the operation of that plant is fundamental to protecting the health of the city and to the operation of our city. And it is also Council's biggest asset. And it's fair to say, as you've heard this morning, that for several decades it has been operating extraordinarily well out in the suburb of Bromley to the east of the city, and that all changed with the fire in November. The fire itself was a catastrophic event, and we wish to acknowledge and apologise to particularly the local residents about the smell that has pervaded the neighbourhoods and indeed much of the city since the fire. We know that living with the odours from the wastewater treatment plant is both unpleasant and distressing for people in the immediate vicinity. So just to clarify the sources of the odours, following the fire, there were several sources of odour from a damaged plant. However, most of those have been resolved, and we are now left with two major sources of odour. The first one from the oxidation ponds, and that is due to the very high load now going onto those oxidation ponds given the compromised plant. And Adam will take us through more of that detail later. The second source of odour, which is a more acute and less frequent odour, is from the trickling filters themselves. So while the trickling filters are offline and they're not tanks, so they're not full of water, they are housings with a plastic trickling filter media within them, and when it rains, the organic matter that is still attached to that media does begin to break down and emits a foul odour from time to time, and the neighbourhood affected depends on the weather conditions at the time. So we'll talk more about that later, but to the presentation itself, what our focus is on improving the operation of that treatment plant and finding the best possible and fastest solution to addressing those odours that are impacting the residents. Adam Toos will take us through how that plant worked prior to the fire, what damage was caused, and what we've been doing in the days, weeks and months since. Then we'll have Adrian Seeger and Kurt Scorange address some of the insurance and health and safety aspects and some of the investigation of that damage that has been taking place also over those few months, and the proposals and options for removing the filter media from those trickling filters. Two reasons for removing that. One is it'll remove the odour source, and the other is we can then look at the long-term solutions for reinstating treatment. Katie McRae is going to go through what we've done to keep the residents updated and our plans for continuing that. And she will, then I'll come back and just go over the next steps and give a bit of a summary for you. So thank you, and I'm happy to hand over to Adam Toos.
Thank you, Ellen. To understand the impact the fire has had on the treatment efficiency of the plant, it's important to understand the basic operating parameters of the plant. The primary purpose of the plant is to remove organic matter and to break down the nutrient load within the wastewater. To achieve this, the plant uses a combination of physical and biological processes. So on the screen there, you've got a graphic. The sewage comes from around the city via pump stations and goes to the first stage, which is inlet screens, where gross inorganics are taken out: sanitary towels, condoms, false teeth, anything that fits down the toilet. After that process, it goes into grit removal, where sand and grit is settled out and taken away. From there, the flow goes into sedimentation tanks. Here, the flow is slowed down. Organic sludge settles to the bottom of the tanks, where that sludge is taken out, taken to digesters, is dried, and then goes for land remediation. The flow from those primary tanks used to go onto the trickling filters. In there, it used to go to rotating arms, which were at the top underneath the covers, and this would distribute the sewage over the top of the plastic media. The sewage will make its way down through the 8-metre structure. On the plastic media is a naturally occurring biomass which would treat the sewage and take the nutrients out of the sewage as the sewage passed over it. Air is also pumped into the trickling filters and will go through to provide the perfect habitat for that biomass to do the treatment for us. The biomass would obviously grow over time as it's treating the sewage, and this would slough off with the sewage and would join the rest of the sewage into the aeration tanks. Blowers blow air into the aeration tanks through the sewage, which allows the sloughed off biomass material to combine with the flock. So as it moved on to the next process, the clarifiers, it allows that sludge to settle out. Some of that sludge is pumped back through the aeration tanks to keep the process going, and the excess of that sludge is taken off and goes through the digestion process. From the clarifiers, the flow goes to the oxidation ponds, where it takes up to a month to get from the start of the pond to the end, where it's exposed to UV light from the sun, which does the pathogen treatment for us. So I keep going to the next slide. Thank you. The fire that occurred on the 1st of November 2021 caused significant damage to the plant's 2 trickling filters. The damage was such that both filters were rendered inoperable and were subsequently bypassed. The trickling filters are responsible for removing 60% of the nutrient load and were a key component of the treatment process. It's important to note that the efficient removal of nutrients early on in the treatment process is critical for the management of odours. During the fire, runoff from the burnt material and roof material flowed downstream, passing through the aeration tanks, clarifiers and out into the oxidation ponds. This oxidation depleted runoff had a serious impact on the biological processes and at times created anaerobic conditions, which resulted in significant odours. Next slide, please. What you are seeing now is drone footage, which was taken over the Christchurch wastewater treatment plant, focusing on the trickling filters. In that image, you can see the misters working, which was fire suppression to try and put out some of the hot spots, which you can see also smoking on the left-hand side. For context, those filters are 55 metres wide, which is the equivalent of the front door to the back door in this building here, and they are 8 metres high. So it's essentially from ground level on the street outside to the level that we're sitting at in this building here. What did we do immediately after the fire? As soon as possible, the filters were bypassed. We started dosing polyaluminium chloride to the head of the primary tanks. This is an odourless white powder, which is mixed with water to create a solution. And this, at the head of the primary tanks, supports the settling of, introduces enhanced settling of the solids in the settling tanks to take the load off, so taking more sludge out of the system earlier on. This process is still continuing today. The dead sludge was taken out of the activated sludge plant and was taken away to Cape Raleigh. We also tried seeding the activated sludge plant by taking some activated sludge from Littleton wastewater treatment plant. The aeration of the aeration tanks was increased by using all maximum 3 blowers on site, and all 4 tanks were brought in line. Normally we only run on 2. Hydrogen peroxide has also been dosed to the head of the oxidation ponds. When added to water, this breaks down and releases oxygen into the sewage to try and maximise the oxygen saturation to improve the quality of the water in the ponds. Combination of these measures, plus the resilience of the size of the oxidation ponds, has meant that we have continued to meet the conditions of consent for the sewage that's been discharged out into Pegasus Bay. Whilst these initial measures have had some impact on reducing odour emissions, we acknowledge that we have not reduced them to an acceptable level. Our primary focus is to improve the water quality from the wastewater treatment plant going into the ponds, and to remove the trickling filter media as soon as quickly as possible. An adaptive management plan has been prepared for staff and confirmed by consultants. So how have we adapted the plant? As mentioned, the trickling filters are key components of the biological treatment process. Without them, the plant is struggling to process the wastewater effectively. Council staff formulated the concept interim recovery plan, which was subsequently validated and the design detailed by an external consultancy, i.e. to confirm the plan is going to work. The plan involves two key stages. The first one is to convert 2 of the plant's 4 clarifiers into aeration basins and also to increase the activated sludge within those tanks. This will go a significant way to replacing the biological process that was lost by the loss of the trickling filters. The second stage is to install aerators on the oxidation ponds. So, progress on stage 1. The 8 aerators are in on the converted clarifiers, and they have been operational. We have been test running them. They have improved the dissolved oxygen levels going towards the pond, and they are making an effect already. 6 of those aerators have been sourced from the United States. 2 aerators were already in New Zealand. The motors have come from Brazil, submersible cables have been sourced from Australia, pumps have been sourced from Sweden, transformers and switch boxes and electrical cabling have also been sourced from New Zealand. The laying of electrical cables and the installation of transformers to power the aerators is in. However, supply chain issues have delayed some components from overseas. It is anticipated that the pumps will arrive within the next week or 2. Once those are installed, the activated sludge treatment process should be fully up and running, and I anticipate it will take 3 weeks for that process to settle down. Once that's done, the quality of effluent going out to the oxidation ponds should have significantly improved. Therefore, a progressive and noticeable reduction of objectionable odour is anticipated. Stage 2, the oxidation ponds. It is anticipated that additional aerators will also need to be installed on the oxidation ponds. 3 aerators are currently on the ponds and operating. We only know how many additional aerators are going to be needed on the oxidation ponds depending on the success levels of stage 1. We will monitor the situation and respond to the adaptive management plan accordingly. Hydrogen peroxide dosing will be retained on site. However, as anticipated, we will only need that for high rainfall events. When flow comes through, will be above the amount that we can manage to pass through the temporary aeration plant and will have to be bypassed to the ponds. However, this should be managed by the hydrogen peroxide dosing. The polydosing of the primary tanks will also be reviewed to see whether the additional load that is going to be increased as a result of stopping the polydosing is going to be able to be managed by the temporary activated sludge plant. As mentioned before, an Odour report is in the process of being commissioned to establish the baseline of measuring success. We are also working on the installation of a permanent trickling filter bypass solution, so that work is underway at the moment.
Thanks, Adam. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adrian Seeger. I'm Council's Insurance and Asset Manager. And while Adam and his team have been reconfiguring the plant through its significant transformation, I've been working with other external experts and staff on assessing the actual impact of damage to the trickling filters. So we can have the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of assessing the damage, we've been doing this in conjunction with our insurer, who's been remarkably cooperative throughout the whole process and responsive. They had appointed somebody to liaise with us on the 2nd of November and accepted our claim 3 weeks after the fire, almost to the minute. We know that that's remarkably quick because smaller claims that other clients of our brokers have taken 6 weeks to 2 months, and in some cases up to 6 months for the insurer to be satisfied there is a valid claim. As it says on the slide. On the 2nd and 3rd of November, we did a visual damage inspection so that we could be sure there's no issue caused by the concrete tanks themselves to the operation of the plant. Following that, we appointed some external experts to undertake damage assessments, and that included drone footage of the type above, 3D drone surveys, close-up visual inspections up on knuckle boom type machinery, and also scaffolding towers, as you can see on the right hand picture. So we actually had to build some towers to get these people up and over the top of the structures and in to look at the top of the media as well. We've also undertaken a series of removal of concrete cores to check for fire and heat damage, and it's not terribly clear in the presentation picture above, but in that area outlined in red there are a number of holes where these concrete core samples have been taken, and they have actually been sent overseas for analysis to determine any fire or heat damage. We are expecting initial results back from that testing sometime in the next week. As part, well, we've been doing all this. Kurt has been looking at the odour issues from the Trickling filters, so if you want to come up and join me, Kurt.
Good morning, my name is Kurt Scorange. I'm one of the Senior Health and Safety Advisors for Council. So post-fire, we've looked at a number of options to help contain the odours that have been emitted off there. Also looking at all the options that have come from the public as well. So if we could jump to the next slide, please. So after this, consultants were asked to identify and provide preliminary assessments of the effectiveness, risk, environmental management and hazardous materials compliance. This led to the consultants providing odour removal options that were quite uniquely challenging due to the open air environment and the size of the housings for the filters. The scale of these filters, as Adam's already alluded to, are 55 metres in diameter and approximately 8 metres tall. Some of the options that were come up with were more suited to smaller, more enclosed environments. The filter media within the trickling filters is classified as hazardous material. The media material itself contained within the trickling filters was used to treat wastewater, therefore meets a threshold of Class 6 dangerous goods under a land transport rule for dangerous goods. This requires special care when cartage and removal. The media also meets classifications under the Hazardous Substances Regulations and Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act 96. A number of options are being considered to manage the odours from the trickling filters, and these have been grouped in attachment B of the report table today. These have been grouped in ways of chemical treatment, covering, capping and air extraction. It's been noted that covering the filters will create a containment of the gases. This would be more highly dangerous for both our residents and our workers on site alike. All of the chemical treatment options identified so far are by their nature hazardous, with the potential to create further hazardous gases and create an even higher health risk to people. The top layer of plastic, filter media and the roof material that collapsed and melted in the fire has formed a permeable and impermeable media across the top of the surface. This means that any spray application of chemical treatment will not reach all areas of the media. It would be similar to putting a sprinkler on top of this building and expecting to get wet in this room. Removing the material still remains our best and most effective option, and we're currently working with options of removing and or deconstructing the structures. Once the media has been removed, the odours being emitted from the trickling filters will be gone. From the grouping of options that we've looked at,
when we first look at chemical treatment, there are high levels of warning of toxicity to both environmental and health. Recent ideas of deodorizers have caused even more concern around health issues due to the height that the misters would need to be installed, and potential wind and actually spreading that further over the community is likely to cause respiratory irritation. Capping of the filters by way of tarp, cover, whatever other options we've come up with, all would create high concentrations of gases that would be more dangerous to site on staff, and when released into the public would create further health risks. And air extraction options that were investigated would need a negative pressure, so effectively a lid would need to be built on top of that, and that would take longer to construct than what it would be to get to the stage we're at this point now of being almost ready to remove the media material itself. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us back on to the removal of the filter media. As you will all be aware, we have undertaken a direct appointment of a contractor to accelerate the process for this. We've been discussing with the contractor their methodology to carry out the work as quickly as possible, but also as safely as possible, given the unique circumstances, the fact that they are carrying out a major job in the middle of an operating wastewater treatment plant. The actual start date of lifting the media out is still to be confirmed, but the site establishment is planned and resources have started to be booked in and arranged. There'll be some initial site preparation required. The presentation, there's a picture which is partly hidden by the video camera logo there, but it gives an idea of the scale. So that's an 85-ton excavator sitting on a pad of aggregate. So to give it height to reach, they will need to construct and that was carried out during our filter media trial removal back in December. They will need to construct a slightly higher pad than that to get the total reach needed into the tank itself. The methodology is basically to pull out the media, chip it down from what it appears at the moment, which is in that top picture on the slide. It's just bales of plastic filter media, and they're probably just under 1 metre long by 60 centimetres deep, 60 centimetres high. So they'll be pulling those out, and they will be chipping them down into sealed bins, which will then be compacted and loaded out to Cape Valley. We're working with Transwaste Canterbury and the operators of Cape Valley itself to maximise the number of loads we can get out per week. Again, it comes back to the safety involved and effectively finding a level which allows us to work quickly but without putting any further risk on the contractors, the staff, the local community with that material. And unfortunately, there's no two ways around it. The odour is going to increase while we are pulling out that filter media, but they will be setting up misting water sprays. You will remember post-earthquake demolition sites often had big misting cannons on them. They'll be using something similar over top of the extraction and the processing loading area to keep any dust down to the minimum. And that will also then have the effect of suppressing some of the odour as well. This morning I got an update. We're expecting the last couple of bits of information from the contractor today, so we're anticipating being able to make an announcement on that early next week. In terms of announcements, Katie, you're up.
Thank you. If we could go to the next slide, please. So as you can see up there, just want to show you, we've had a few COVID challenges, but since the 1st of November, these are some of the communications that the team has been working on. But I think the point I really want to make here is actually we're continuing reviewing our comms and looking for the most effective ways that we can communicate with residents. We have another flyer drop prepared very shortly. Our e-newsletter has now moved to weekly, and we're keeping our website updated. We're encouraging people to sign up to our newsletter, and they can do so by following that URL, the website link that you can see up there on screen. And we're looking at some other options as well about how we can just keep people informed of progress as things move on.
So just a short recap from me in terms of the next steps. We will, of course, continue to work on the interim operation of the plant in this recovery phase and continue to make improvements and install that new infrastructure as everything arrives. And that will result in an improvement in the operation of the plant, an improvement in the quality of the water going into the ponds, and a continuous improvement in terms of the odour or the potential for odour from those ponds. The challenge then is those trickling filters, and the staff advice is that the removal of that material remains the best and most effective option. So removing that material takes away the source of the odour and completely eliminates that issue. So we've talked about the direct appointment of the contractor, so the fastest possible procurement process has been followed, and we will hope to announce that next week. In terms of that odour increasing during the process, that is true. However, we will work very closely with the contractor and our operation on the site to minimise that as much as possible. And that will include covering filter media that's waiting to be chipped. That will include choosing the weather conditions for those operations that could result in the most odour being released, and continuing to work on the treatment plant process itself so that that underlying odour from the oxidation ponds is continually reduced as quickly as possible. So just to reiterate that we as a team apologise for the odour and the continuation of that odour problem over the last few months, and I do want to reassure you that we are doing everything that we can to address that, and that we do understand the need for speed. So additional resources have been brought in to focus on this issue and to accelerate progress. And I'm happy to move to questions.
Thank you. So thanks to staff for the presentation. Now moving to questions. Jimmy Chen.
Thank you. One question. Because last night you sent it to the council regarding the new revised attachment A and attachment B. Particularly based on this earlier the presentation, you consider an odour removal and also the regular management options. My question is whether impact those the timeline for the event attachment A regarding the new attachment B, have any impact or not timeline?
So from the staff perspective and the continued operation of the plant, we still believe that removing that filter media is the very best option, and that going to cover, capping or chemical treatment would actually delay that removal and make the problem persist for longer.
Okay, but the completion date still a commitment by the end of this year.
That's correct, and we'll be working with the contractor on those dates. And if we can do it faster, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leanne.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was an incredibly helpful step through all of the different features of this, and I think the one that stood out for me that I hadn't appreciated was the fire burning for just over 3 weeks, and the impact of the melting of the plastic and the roof into uneven sort of caps, I guess, over the top of the media, making, I guess, progress is going to be more challenging because of that. But also the other thing is getting other chemicals into the plant to reduce the odour. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, if the so the damage to the roof, so it's a combination of the melted plastic media and the roof material itself that is coalesced on top of the trickling filter media. If that hadn't happened, it would have been relatively easy to skim off the top layer of damaged filter, and in fact we may even have been able to put the trickling filters back into service once we'd replaced the arms. However, it's done considerable damage to that media. And even when the fire service tried to put out those hotspots, they had a lot of trouble getting enough water into the areas within the media that were still burning. And while we maintained the sewage running into those filters to assist the fire service in keeping the volume of water really high, we did still have that smouldering plastic for a number of weeks.
Yeah, so if you could go on the presentation to slide 4. The fire broke out on one trickling filter. So the fire started off on, next slide. Back to the fire damage and implications slide. That one. So looking on the picture on the left, the fire started in the trickling filter on the right, which resulted in a partial collapse of the roof onto it. So half the roof burnt on one side and then the fire collapsed on one side. That was the one that was most difficult to get out because of the sealing of the surface. The one on the left, it was more of a complete collapse of the roof. So the one on the left was easier to put out because it was easier to get the water over it. The photograph on the right is difficult to see. In some parts, the media is burnt down about 3 metres. So when you're spraying the water onto it, the water naturally goes to those lower areas and sort of surcharges straight through the filter. Whereas some of the other areas which are protected, not burnt down quite as much, those are the areas where you're going to really struggle to get any application of chemical or anything onto it. The filters are originally designed to have perfect surcharging equally all the way through the from the top to the bottom, but as a result of the fire it took 3 weeks to get out simply because we just could not get the water to the areas where the hotspots were occurring.
But that's also then presents a challenge for introducing
Anything.
new chemicals into the system.
Correct.
Yeah. And the other thing was scale, and somebody described it the other day as being like this height. So we're on the 2nd floor of the council building. The ground floor, Hereford Street through to where the art gallery is on, the end of the council site on Worcester Street. That's the scale that we're talking about.
Yep, so it's 55 metres in diameter. Yeah. So to get to the centre is 25 metres from the edge. So trying to get any application controlled over a 25 metre distance is quite difficult.
And but just 2 more questions. One was in relation to and it may be health and safety. The question was in relation to the options that you got the consultants to put together as quickly as possible to, what would be the sort of options that might limit the impact of the stench. I mean, let's not call it what it isn't. It's a stench. And so what was it that the consultants were basically looking at? They were, as I understand it from the report, the updated report, is that they were looking at smaller contained environments rather than these massive trickling filters.
Yes, that's right. So the sheer scale of these filters presents a really unique challenge on how to contain this due to that sheer size. There were some options that might have been viable for a smaller option, so significantly smaller, but just given the sheer size of these, a lot of these options weren't going to be viable or would have created significant risk to the operation for the contractors, staff on site, and the residents around the area as well.
So it was basically a combination of the scale and the melted mess over the top.
Correct.
Okay, and the last question is, and I don't know who's the right person to ask this to, but how are we keeping the regulator informed? Because obviously the regulator is Environment Canterbury. they're responsible for air quality. They know that we've had a catastrophic fire. So how is that engagement taking place, and who is maintaining that relationship?
So we sent a letter to Environment Canterbury the same week as the fire to put them on notice that there was a risk of breach of our consent conditions for both the wastewater discharge out through the ocean outfall and for our discharge to air in terms of odour beyond the boundary. In terms of the discharge via the outfall, we've managed to stay within the conditions of our consent, which is no small miracle actually, but the part of that is because it takes so long for wastewater to pass through the plant. So it takes over a month for wastewater to come in through the screens and then be discharged through the outfall. So there's quite a long residence time in the plant, and we managed to get quite a lot of those interim operations in place to maintain the quality of that effluent within the consent conditions. It's not as good as it usually is, but it's within the conditions of the consent. And in terms of the odour, we all know that has been very much more difficult to contain. So we have a regular meeting with Environment Canterbury, and we have a program manager, Michael Croucher, who's been appointed to manage the recovery of the plant, and he has developed a very good working relationship with Environment Canterbury.
Right, so they're all up to date with what's going on.
Yes, and we keep them up to date with the monitoring of the conditions of the consent.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Helen, just a couple of different points. Before they burnt down, I was under the impression that these trickling filters were very efficient and only working at sort of 60% because they were so...
Yes, indeed. So the plant is an extraordinarily well-run plant, and you heard that actually in the deputations this morning, that people had no concerns about buying a house in Bromley because you'd hardly know the wastewater treatment plant was there when it's running so well. And indeed, Adam Toos was on the telephone to me during the fire, and he watched one go down and thought, we can run the plant with the other one. There's plenty of redundancy there, and then the other one went down. So, yes, indeed, we had plenty of redundancy in that plant with 2 trickling filters.
We could have run with one. If
we could have
were
run with one, yes. Okay. However, without them, we've obviously had to scramble and change the configuration of that plant to replace that treatment effectiveness.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, just this for everyone else, that when they were built, they were run for 5 years without a roof, and then roofs went on to solve a similar problem to what we're having at the moment.
That's correct. The roofs went on in the 80s.
Yeah, and that helped. Now, other question is the second clarifier going in. When I was out there the other day, the first one was going, and that's where the little bit of tiny bits of foam were. Is the other one just had water in it and it was ready to go, or are you waiting for?
No. We've had both clarifiers operating as activated sludge plants. They're just running on diesel at the moment till we get all the electrics fully in.
Okay, and at the moment, lastly, we're dealing with a contractor, which is good. Has the contractor got enough resource, or can he pull in other contractors to help him so that we can do both at the same time?
Are you back to the trickling filters?
So, still on trickling filters? Yeah.
Adrian.
Can we, as the contractor that we're dealing with, got enough resource to do both at once, and that will halve the time that these people are having to cope with?
The contractor has got sufficient resource and has started booking in resource from other firms that they can use, particularly around the trucking and things like that. In terms of doing 2 at once, that came down to, as I mentioned, we're trying to do it as quick as possible, but as safe as possible. And basically, if you look at the photo up there on the left of the 2 filters, between the trickling filters and the operational plant, the gap is about 15 metres.
Yeah.
It's about the same on the other side to the boundary fence.
Yes.
In terms of running machinery, and off to the right of them as the photo looks is going to be the laydown area. In terms of running machinery on 2 of them at once in that constricted zone,
Have we asked them?
We have talked to them about it. They are considering it. Our view as staff is that it would actually be very difficult to do, given what is required in terms of exclusion zones around it and the need for Adam and his team to continue operating the plant right next door to it.
Okay, and now almost lastly, with building a ramp up for the crane and the machine, the excavator to see inside, is that going to go right around the whole thing? Is that is one shed load of stuff?
No, short answer, no. They are going to build one for access for the large excavator, and that will start pulling out the top. And then when they get to a point, there'll be a smaller machine able to be put inside it to move it to there for extraction.
Same place, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we won't be building right around both of them.
So the mound will be between the two trickling filters, so that they only need one mound for both. Is it?
I'm not sure where they're
Okay,
planning
I'm
on
just trying to
locating it. Yeah,
see if it.
that's part of the
do it as
info
quickly
we're
as possible.
expecting back shortly on
Okay, thank
exact
you.
layouts.
Are there further questions? Yanni?
Thank you. Just in the attachment that we've had, sorry, just bring it up. There's an option that's on page 5, and that is to install super water absorbance layer on top of trickling filter. It says that few real benefits as weight of absorbency layer will compromise structures and delay removal timeframe. Then goes to say that the steel distributor structure can remain and doesn't need to be removed. And then it's got that there's some risks, but I was just trying to understand, like, if the contractor is working on one of the trickling filters, is there an ability to use any of the options in that table, and this option seemed to be the one that could possibly help. But are you able just to give us a little bit more advice around that, if we are able to just use any of the options in this table on one of the trickling filters, if that reduces the risk and can deal with some of the odour problems? But yeah, thank you.
Hard one to answer until we get the full methodology from the contractor. Based on what we have in front of us at this stage, the risk would remain relevant regardless whether one filter was done at a time or both.
The other thing to take into account when we're talking about putting capping layers on top of the structures, like whether it's bark or an absorbency foam or something like that, the structures themselves are not designed to hold any weight, any pressure. They are simply a shell for the media that's in it. So were we to do anything like that, there is the risk that by adding all that additional weight inside it, you're going to push out panels, which will then cause because of the design of the tanks, will then cause them to effectively unzip around.
Right. Okay, it just says that we need further information on the specific superwater absorbance solution to carry out further analysis. Who's provided this sort of environmental management and hazardous material responses that we've got?
These are our consultants in this instance. So when we're looking at that, we need to understand further that substance to work out what additional risk that will pose to the environmental management of the plant and the disposal of that product after its use.
Yeah. But we should be able, once we've got the strength and the strength testing of the cores, we should have some idea of the load bearing capacity of the structure.
No, we know the load bearing capacity now from the original designs, and the advice from our engineers has been, if you put any significant additional weight on top, then you are risking a failure of the structure.
Okay, thank you. I had a question about the air quality monitoring. So we sent ECAN a letter after the fire, recognising that we were likely to be in breach of our consent around ocean outfall and the air discharge. Appreciate your response around the ocean outfall, but did ECAN put any requirements on us to measure what was being discharged into the air? And if so, what were they? Or if not, why not?
So we've voluntarily been doing additional monitoring of the plant, and that is for both management purposes of the plant, because the interim operation is very different and the plant is not as resilient as it was. And we've been providing that additional monitoring, those additional monitoring results to Environment Canterbury. However, they're mostly focused on the quality of the wastewater discharge. We as a council don't do air monitoring as such. But we are looking at getting some additional resources in to do some more detailed odour monitoring around the plant and make sure that we've clearly pinpointed and quantified as much as possible the sources of those odours right across the plant. We're fairly sure about the odours from the oxidation ponds because those are relatively simple to monitor, and Environment Canterbury themselves have been doing some monitoring. However, the other sources of emissions tend to be infrequent and related to the weather conditions. So we need to do some more work to fully characterise those.
So I guess I'm just sort of astounded that one of the key consenting conditions is around air discharge, and yet we don't seem, like the question that I put in on the 6th of April, are you able to advise the community how we're measuring the air quality and odour effects in regards to the composition of the discharge from the wastewater treatment plant? People are asking, how do we know it's not harmful? So no one has done that today.
Environment Canterbury have done some work.
Right.
We have had some conversations with the community public health people from the District Health Board, and they have not raised any direct public health concerns. If they had direct public health concerns, they would be raising those.
But if no one's monitoring what's being discharged, how does anyone know it's not harmful?
We understand what is being discharged, and most of the issue is around odour. And the issues around odour are more the indirect effects, as you heard described this morning, in terms of distress and loss of quality of life in terms of people's houses and their being able to live and work outside.
To continue to back this up, we do have scientists from Hamilton that have arrived in Christchurch this morning that are undertaking specialised odour monitoring from the plant directly and also around the surrounding suburbs, following the same mapping that ECAN have been using to give us a greater understanding of what that odour is.
And I just note that they were just coming down for a very limited period of time, and obviously we've heard that depending on climatic conditions, things can be worse or improved. So what's our plan for regular air quality monitoring around use of smart sensors, technology, working with ECAN or the CDHB? Is there any sort of ongoing program that we've looked at to provide confidence to local residents about what's being discharged?
Yes. The equipment that the scientists has brought down today, we are also leasing off them to continue to monitor using the same methodologies that they are. So it means that when we have these adverse weather effects, that we can continue to monitor these odours and send those samples away for further analysis.
Right. And when are we likely to get the first results of that sample?
Next week.
Right. Thank you. The other question from me, I've got three more questions, sorry. It seems, I appreciate that you've spent a lot of time on the technical aspects of keeping the plant operational and working through the insurance and the technical solutions around what can be done. I guess what I'm just trying to understand, and I think this was reinforced by the comment that we've heard at a previous briefing, that this is almost unparalleled in the world around the scale of damage that's occurred at a wastewater treatment plant, is I'm trying to understand where in the recovery response we've got a sort of health and well-being plan being put in place to deal with the social and the community well-being aspects of what's happened, especially when we think about our response post-earthquake, where we saw a huge focus on the well-being of local communities that were adversely impacted. So is there a plan in place around the health and well-being of the local community? Who's driving it? If there's not one, how do we best get one in place?
the focus, as you have quite rightly pointed out, has been on improving the operation of the plant and reducing the potential for those odours, because it is the odour that is the real challenge for the local community. The plant itself is running at full capacity. We can accept everything that is offered up to us through the pipes. However, the effectiveness of treating that is the challenge for us, and then the resulting odours from the parts of the treatment process that are not coping, particularly the ponds, and then the residual from the trickling filters. In terms of the community, the best that we can do and what we have been focusing on is the communications, so that people understand what is happening and why it's happening and what we are doing to address it and how long they will have to put up with it. That has been interrupted, as you understand, by COVID and lockdowns. We did have a public-facing meeting right at the beginning, and then we were unable to do any further of those. So the information has largely been going out on social media platforms, through Newsline, and we've done some leaflet drops to those most affected neighbourhoods. Because while you can smell it right across the city, and I can certainly smell it at my place, in the centre of the city, that's a nuisance. For the local neighbourhoods, it's really distressing. And for those neighbourhoods, we've done a lot more in terms of direct leaflet drops to let people know what is happening and why it's happening. And you can, if you have a look on the Environment Canterbury website where they do the monitoring of where the complaints about air quality are coming, you'll see how they follow the weather patterns. So we'll get them from New Brighton if there's a gentle southerly blowing. We'll get them across Linwood and Phillipstown if there's the general northeast blowing. So it moves around the city, but it's those immediate neighbourhoods that are most affected, and those immediate neighbourhoods where we've focused most of the communication efforts.
And can I just be really clear? The Ministry of Health or the CDHB has not expressed any concern over what's happening.
The Ministry of Health and the CDHB are quite aware that some people have quite high levels of distress and upset around this, and their recommendation, just as it was through the earthquakes and following the mosque shootings, is for people to talk to their own doctors about what is happening for them. Those are the best people to provide advice on their health and well-being.
Okay. And just a final question from me is, and I appreciate that we're in a unique situation with a lot of things happening in water at the moment, and reforms and changes all over the place in terms of central government and the pressure that's putting on council. But I guess I'm just interested in whether we've considered setting up a sort of joint task force with our partners, maybe with central government, maybe with some external people. I was just, I guess, reflecting on, again, the comment that was made that this is almost unparalleled in terms of the world, what we're seeing in terms of the damage and the challenge. And I just wonder, and we've heard from some of the deputations today, whether we have enough resources and whether we might think of additional expertise or support or help to have a kind of focus on doing everything that we can do. So, has there been consideration of a joint working group, if you like, for lack of a better term, or a joint task force with partner agencies to ensure that any barriers to getting progress on solving the problem are overcome in a creative and practical sense?
We've certainly been working closely with our consultants and contractors on this issue, and they have been very supportive in terms of providing resources. It is a very busy time for the Three Waters industry as a whole, as you know, and there's a lot of work happening already. So there's a lot of additional infrastructure renewals and upgrades happening across the country, and that has been a challenge for us. And you heard Adam go through some of the supply line issues that we've had. But yes, we have worked with other agencies, and we have a very good working relationship with Environment Canterbury in terms of how we work with them and work within the conditions of our consent. And we'll certainly be talking to them if any new consents are required for the replacement infrastructure. In terms of central government, I don't think, to be perfectly honest, there's a lot that central government could offer us at this point in time. There's a good level of expertise across the country in the private sector and from other councils that we can draw upon. And I don't think that is indeed necessary. There's no Ministry of Works to roll in anymore.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just to drill down into that a little bit further, and then I've got Pauline, Anne, and back to Phil. The people from Hamilton are arriving today, and they're doing air quality monitoring, both on site and in the neighbouring areas. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, what are they looking for? How long will that work take, and where will it be reported?
That work's being undertaken today. We expect the results of that next week. It's to further analyse the odours and what's being smelt around the area to support the information that we've been receiving from our consultants from Environment Canterbury. It's effectively another opinion to make sure that all that advice remains current.
Right. And in terms of where that's reported to, will that be reported to us, or can that be reported to us as elected members?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So now moving to Pauline, and then I've got Anne and Phil. Pauline.
Just quickly, and thank you so much for the excellent report. It definitely shows that you have been doing a heck of a lot since that fire to address this issue. But my question is the fact that the media is going to be removed during the winter. There'll be positives out of that because of the temperature drop, is that correct? And could we expect the odour to be possibly a bit less because of the cold weather?
Possibly. Certainly the cooler weather does help.
And what about increased rainfall? Because is it correct that the dampness only increases the odour when it's followed by warm temperatures? Is that correct?
Yeah, odour issues are extraordinarily complex. So it is the wetting and drying of that media that is the source of the odour, but then, yes, the temperature conditions, but also the wind conditions following that wetting cycle have a big impact on how bad it is and where it goes. So if we've got strong winds, it's actually dispersed quite quickly, but those very still cooler nights, it'll drop down into the local area and very badly affect those immediate neighbourhoods. So, I mean, you all understand that odour is both an objective and a subjective measures that are in place to assess the impact on people. And I don't know how much you've done around odours. Some of you around the table will have done quite a bit. So there's those FIDOL factors. So it's about frequency, it's about intensity, it's about duration, it's about offensiveness, and it's about location. All of those factors come into play. And the further work we're doing is to characterise the odours themselves. So what is the makeup of that odour? So we know there's hydrogen sulfide present. We know there's sewage and decaying organic matter present. We know that some of that is affected by sulphur compounds as well. I mean, you all know the smell of natural gas. It's got mercaptans added because those organic compounds with sulphur smell so bad. It's so at very, very low levels. So it's a warning in terms of natural gas. So that characterisation of the odours will help us in terms of understanding where they're coming from and what best we can do in terms of the management to reduce that source of the odour.
Thanks. Awesome.
Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. We have heard this morning, of the terrible distress that's been caused by the stench, and I don't believe as an organisation we're doing enough to support people and their well-being. What are some of the options we've got? We've heard a little bit about that this morning, but what can we do? Can we set up a small group to address this? Are we going to have a helpline set up? What can we do to help people with this the immediate effects of their mental and physical health in this situation?
So all of the usual channels are available to people through council, so they can continue to put questions through and ask us directly if they want further information about what's happening in their particular area. We are looking at stepping up the communications, as I talked about before. And there are avenues for support for people who are in a particularly bad situation, such as through the Mayor's Welfare Fund. However, we haven't proposed setting up anything specific to this incident.
would it be appropriate for us to perhaps suggest that through an amendment this morning that we do set up a group that could address those things? I've just heard this morning about extra power bills, for example, because people are having to, stay inside and not go outside, or dehumidifiers needed, those sorts of things. Even vouchers to the hot water pools would be something that would perhaps communicate that we are aware and would like to provide some care. So could we bring that through and as a recommendation? Would that be appropriate?
I think that what you would need is some further advice from staff on the options that are available, and we could certainly get our community team to have a look at that and bring some advice back to you rather than table an additional recommendation today.
So you can just do that without us needing to put anything in the resolutions today.
Certainly we can.
How quickly would you be able to come back with that?
We're already doing thinking about this conversation, so it should be within a week or so.
Right.
Yep, it clarifies it. Yep.
I'm happy to move the resolution, but I'd like to have put on it a request that staff prepare some advice, and if they do so with a smaller group of people, and you serve as the chair of the Mayor's Welfare Fund, so that would make you ideal to perhaps lead a little group of people to do that, and come back to council. So I've got another recommendation that I'd like to include in it, and that is that this updates be presented fortnightly to the council, or finance and performance until this matter's resolved. And then that means that there is no backlog of public-facing understanding of the issues that we're confronted with here. So I'd like those two elements to be added to the resolution. On that basis, I'm happy to move it.
Excellent. Right, so we need to come up with some wording. I don't know whether staff captured enough of that to be able to put something together that we can add to the resolution, but that would have the effect of staff bringing some advice back around setting up the group and the focus on community welfare that Anne talked about, community wellbeing, community welfare, and also to achieve that update, what effectively would be every 2 weeks. If it's coming to finance and performance and to council, that would be effectively a public update every 2 weeks, which means there'll be a continuous flow of information with an expectation that even if there was minimal new information, the update was still on the agenda, so that we had the opportunity for even a small amount of new information to be presented and to ask any questions, so that there was always that regular flow of information coming in a public forum, in a public meeting.
Thank you, and I'll be seconding that. Thank you.
All right, so we're indicating that Leanne's moving and Anne is seconding. We just need to come up with some wording. I'll leave staff just to work on that for the moment, and then we'll capture something. Phil, you had further questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I realise, and I commend everyone for all the work we're doing, but I'm trying to just get a result, trying to get something that can happen as soon as we possibly can to alleviate this problem. I've got two questions. I'm just looking at an overhead photo of, not like that, but just here, down there. There is a lot of room to the south where we've got the set down area ready for work to be done, but there is a hell of a lot of room out to the east. If we took over that access road, there's a lot of room to be able to do two things at once down there, and I think we should investigate that. Now, I now understand a little bit more. Now, someone said, I think it was you, the melted roof has gone down and sealed a bit of it, so someone coming up with an idea of spraying something on it may not be as effective because a lot of it's sealed. I think you said about putting a sprinkler on the roof here and it wouldn't get wet. How much percentage of the roof is blocked, roughly, very roughly?
I anticipate it's very difficult to know that.
Would it be 50?
The one on the left is certainly more, the surface will be more porous compared to the one on the right.
More
porous.
Right.
So
Now,
Like I say, it took 3 weeks of continuous application of water onto it to get the fire out. We were putting about 1.2 tons of water over each filter per second, and the fire still carried on for 3 weeks.
okay, so what I'm getting at, that in theory, if we'll say 50% of it's blocked over the two of them,
I wouldn't like to.
there's got to be some of it blocked. So you would say that the stuff that's blocked is not smelling because it ain't getting wet because it's got a roof on it.
It's very difficult to know. It's 8 meters down. We don't. You can see where there's voids where some of it's sealed on the top, some of it's burnt down. There was hot spots going through. So those hot spots is obviously combustion happening below. So what you see at the surface is possibly that. It may be like a limestone cave surface underneath. It might be that it gets to some areas and there's big voids where the water will just fall and capture and still have 4 meters of dry media underneath it.
So I read, and I can't see it on this page, but I think it's on the other one with all the read writing on it. Have we thought about livening up those suction fans? I know you say that you've got to have a negative pressure in there, but if the odour is just quietly wafting out, and we start up those fans and suck it down and blow it through into the biofilter, if a percentage of the roof is blocked, it must stop it wafting up. It must suck it down a little bit.
A lot of that pipe work was quite damaged during the fire. Certainly on the top, we don't quite know what it's like at the bottom. We did take off a lot of the motors and the stuff to be able to improve. I can't remember the exact reason. We took a lot of the pipe work to bits as well in order to be able to do some investigations, spray water and all stuff like that.
So those pipes around the bottom, the big white ones that I think are about a metre diameter, they've all gone.
No, they're still there, but we dismantled quite a lot of it during sort of the investigations and during the fire suppression.
Okay. And I asked this question the other day, and someone did tell me, how, and I value your input, how much depth of fluid is in the bottom of the tank at the moment? Do you?
Hydraulically wise, probably off the top of my head, up to a metre.
And why don't we take that out? Because we can. There's nothing to stop us, is there?
The bottom of the trickling filters are still hydraulically linked to the rest of the wastewater treatment process. The way this site has been set up is the channels are generally square or rectangular, and they use metal slide gates that go in.
Yeah.
The frequency of which we use those slide gates is very infrequent. For example, the trickling filters, we certainly haven't isolated them in the recent history. Those gates don't particularly seal well, so we could pump it down, but then it will just refill itself again, and we don't believe there's any benefit in doing that because we don't believe the water at the bottom is a source of odour.
So if we put the gates down to stop the treatment plant coming into the filters and put a submersible pump on the filter side, we could pump it down and perhaps make it a lot drier in there and maybe try and solve some of the problem. Have we tried that?
We don't believe it will make any impact. Okay. We can certainly have a look at it, but it's not come up by any recommendations by the site staff or by the consultants.
Okay, because I'm just sort of getting just that if it's wet it smells, so if we can try and make it dry it won't. But
so there's no media in the channels at the bottom. So the way the structure is, you've got 8 metres of media. You've then got a base, and then which is porous, which then goes into drainage channels underneath, and then that comes down into an outer channel. Yes, I do not believe there's significant amount of water held in those collecting drainage channels underneath the trickling filters. It's more likely to when they gradient down to the lowest point at which that's then hydraulically
which is drawn away, but there's nothing to stop it. There's nothing bad in that would stop us putting into our system, into the wastewater treatment plant, because it is just sewage what you deal with anyway.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, so we could maybe try it. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, I've just had a comment through by message advising that some people that are watching the live stream are finding it difficult to hear people. So if I could just ask everybody to speak clearly and speak perhaps a little bit more loudly than you normally would, just so that people can hear on the live stream. I just had a message from somebody who's finding it difficult to hear. So that's fine. Now, are there any further questions? I've got Mike and then back to Yanni. Mike.
Thank you. Look, acknowledging obviously the need to do things safely, is there any provisions within the contract to allow for incentive payment for timely completion of the work?
the short answer is anything's possible. We are looking through the contract wording and what we could do at the moment, but obviously given it's commercially sensitive, it's not appropriate to say what we will or won't be doing in this particular meeting.
Yep, thank you. Yanni.
Yeah, thanks. Just under 4A, could we change that to ask staff to prepare a psychosocial response plan with the CDHB and possible NGOs or other potential partners, such as NGOs?
I would imagine that the advice that we get back, depending on what that advice is, would have the ability, if it was felt to be the right thing at that time, to lead to that as a proposal. But I think we need to have the advice in front of us that we're asking for here, given that we've heard that that's only going to take a week before we go straight to the end point of preparing such a plan.
So it's probably worth noting, Councillor Johansson, that we are meeting with the District Health Board next week, so their input will be provided.
That was my understanding, so that's why I thought it would be good to record that.
We're not. We don't want to predetermine the outcome of that meeting, though. But we are meeting with them, so they will inform whatever response we have and bring back to you.
Yeah, and my understanding is after other significant disasters in our city, there has been extensive extra resources put in to dealing with the psychosocial impacts that those events have had on our local communities. And so I would hope that when this comes back, we can have some advice around what's happening from other agencies as well.
Yeah.
Can I just check? One thing I wanted to check on was appreciate that we've got a very complicated insurance situation, and also appreciate that we're in a kind of discussion with a contractor. But I'm just trying to understand if money was no obstacle, is there anything else that we would be doing that we're limited by not having sufficient budget?
It's a good question, Adam. In terms of interim operation,
In terms of interim operation, no. The solution that's proposed, I believe, will treat the vast majority of the sewage going through the process, and it will have a positive ongoing increase on the ponds. Once the temporary arrangement's in, we'll then monitor the ponds and focus on that, and then work out what the best strategy is for those. Gut feel for me is that we will see positive improvement in the ponds from about 10 to 12 weeks onwards. But as alluded before below, climate, flow variations will all have an impact. I don't believe there's any more. Obviously, there'll be a permanent solution going in the future, but I believe the temporary interim solution will be sufficient.
we are putting some additional resources in through the communications. I'm looking at Katie, but she's nodding that is sufficient.
Right. And so nothing that we're discussing with our contractor around timeliness of getting the problem solved or other potential things that we're looking at is driven by a financial consideration. That's driven by what's practical and what's technologically possible.
That's right. It's all around the practicalities and the logistics of it.
Right.
The insurer has been informed and along with us the whole way, so there's no issues from that side of things around finances or restrictions that might be put on by them.
And if that changes, I presume you would come back to us and let us know if there was additional resource required to achieve things quicker.
Yes, we would.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So then just turning to these resolutions, can we in 4B be quite specific, report fortnightly to council or the council and the Finance and Performance Committee, so that it's clear that that report is a formal report that's coming either to council or Finance and Performance? To council or the Finance and Performance Committee. It just really captures the expectation and the commitment. All right, and you're comfortable that 4A captures what you were wanting to achieve there?
Yeah, I think it's general enough to allow you know, the sort of groups that Yanni's been talking about to be involved in that, as well as residents. So yes, that's good.
And indeed, I mean, for all we're, just using the word support, we've kept it quite simple. The discussion makes it very clear that we're talking about welfare, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about psychosocial support. Yeah, that's fine. All right, so that's moved by Leanne and seconded by Anne, which now allows us to move into debate. Is there any debate on this? Leanne.
Thank you. And I would like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the community that has been incredibly affected by this impact. I know that when we looked at the wastewater treatment plant fire page on the council website, it talked about an unpleasant smell. That has been replaced with the phrase an offensive stench and an apology for the horrible smells from our wastewater treatment plant since the fire. We know the impact that this is having on the community in terms of their sense of well-being. And there isn't a single person around this table that wouldn't vote for a quick fix if there was one. And that, I guess, has been the biggest challenge facing anyone who sits around a council table in terms of making decisions. There are things that you want to do, and you are absolutely dependent on advice that enables you to make those decisions. The advice that we've received in relation to this paper has taken a step further, some advice that was put together very quickly last week, summarising what our consultants had been asked to do, which was look at what is done to reduce odour in these sorts of circumstances anywhere in the world. And what they came back with were a series of options which could be defined now, as we can see, in the different ways that they have been summarised today. You either add chemicals, you cover, you cap, you aerate, pull air out. And each of them comes with a set of challenges because they're all designed for a much more limited environment than something that's 55 metres wide, from Worcester Street to Hereford Street in this council building, and as high as our second floor, 9 metres high. I think that was the right number. And so when we're dealing with something of that scale, what looks like a ready solution and suggested with the best possible intent becomes a solution that creates more risk and doesn't have the impact that you would hope that it would have. I think we do have to work as fast as we possibly can, but I'm also very mindful of every employer's obligation under the Health and Safety and Employment Act. We saw what happened in Pike River when people cut corners, where people were put under pressure, bonuses and others payable by Christmas. And we have to be cautious in that regard. We do have to make sure that that is a safe work site. Let's fix it without the loss of any lives. Let's fix it without any further damage to health. I wanted this advice on additional ways that we could provide support for affected residents, because we do need to find ways of listening to the plea that has been so eloquently put in front of us today. I wasn't present for all of them. I was speaking to the opening of the Māori Women's Welfare League conference, but when I came back, I was able to listen to, when I was coming back, I was able to listen to the presentations, and the last of them when I arrived. So I heard what people had to say, and I believe that what we're committing to today is a constant stream of communication, but we're offering a two-way street. So if people have got any questions, they can come to us, and we are going to work with our partner organisations to see what support that we can continue to provide. And if that means finding different ways of helping people cope in this really, really difficult environment, then we will find those those ways to do those as well. But I do want to also pay tribute to staff. This was an important piece of work that needed to be dealt with in a rushed period, in a week surrounded by holidays. So the Easter weekend followed by recess for the councillors, followed by Anzac, and but to have brought that all together last week, and then providing the additional information today, the walkthrough, that's going to give us so much more better footing for communicating with the wider public as to the where, why and how, and the significance of the work that has been done and will continue to do. I know that the contractor, and I'm looking forward to the announcement next week, but I know that the contractor is on board with the council with the concept of making this as urgent a priority as can possibly be achieved while ensuring the safety of all those working on the site and the wider community.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Jimmy?
Okay, yes, okay. First one, I think the implementation is most crucial and urgent, particularly we listen to the staff, the report. Highlight those attachment A and attachment B, particularly attachment B, the reasonable regarding removal, those odor and also management options. Then attachment A, that's important, commitment, that's important, particular for the, probably will be a day or two, contractor will be the appoint and the methodology conform, then they can go on. By the end of this year, all those filter media removal will be complete. This, I think, is the affected residents and all the eastern area, the people, there the desire, expectation. The other one, the communication is very, very crucial and important. While there's a gap, we can, even today, we listen to the particular 22, those the organic, the composting, the facility, but still, someone cover this, the wastewater, the treatment one, can see communication is important. So once those contractor has been confirmed, probably the fly to distribute to all those affected residents, that's important. And also based on this recommendation, regular the communication with all those the affected residents eastern area, as well as put on the council website, let the people know, because this is kind of a very crucial in the issue. Third one is we heard, particular last the residents, they make the deputation, they affected by this the kind of the reverse the effect, how to provide a suitable way can give them the practical help. This is very, very crucial and important. So I fully support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Yep. I feel very, very sorry for the people, and I would like to think that after we'd been given the nod by the insurance company that the claim had been accepted, not worked all its way through, and if this sadly happens again, heaven help us, that we bite the bullet and we get stuck into it. We could have been discussing this 3 months ago before the smell really started getting carried away. Now I know, is it going to be demolished? Is it going to be emptied? But even if it cost us a bit more to empty it and then one day it was demolished, the concrete around the outside, we should have taken the bull by the horns and done it, and then we wouldn't be in the position we're in. But I'll support anything that gets something moving. Thank you.
Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. I think without doubt, we are in an extraordinary situation, and I think this is very different to the organics plant, which was a very deliberate decision of council to make a call to put it where it did. This was a disaster, and this requires a disaster crisis management response. And I think if any city in the world who's been through what we've been through, we should be as good a prepared as any to address these sorts of things happening to us and to our community. I just want to draw the parallel that in 2012, we built an 18,000 seat stadium in 11 weeks. And what was said at the time was the pressure of a tight time frame meant a less traditional approach to the project. And so I just think we really need to focus, and I appreciate there's a negotiation going on and we're in the middle of appointing a contractor, but I really want to just focus on the fact that we need to do things in a unique way to solve this problem and address the odours as soon as possible. Everything is high risk. We've seen that from the table that's been put in front of us, but ultimately decisions and actions need to be weighed up about versus the harm, against the harm being caused to the local community versus the level of risk of doing things. Not doing things is just not an option in my view. And I hear the pleas that have been made today, and I welcome the fact that councillors have acknowledged that. But please understand, these pleas have been made for months. People like myself have raised these concerns as every opportunity I've had to address the psychosocial impact that this is having on our local communities. And so I hope with the report coming back next week that we can turn the corner to addressing and recognising the health and wellbeing impact that this has had and that this will have going forward. I hope that we can show as much commitment to solving this problem as we can when we build a temporary rugby stadium in Addington. And just to support the idea that we do get some air quality monitoring and odour monitoring, although it may not be specifically our responsibility, I do believe we have an obligation to our local community to tell them as much as we can about what's going into the air and what's being discharged. And I hope that ECAN and the CDHB can join with us around supporting the things that we need to do to get this problem solved as quick as possible.
Thank you. This report and the public presentation of it, I think, has been incredibly helpful in providing information, in allowing questions to be asked and answered in a public environment, making it clear what we've been doing and what we're intending to do, what next steps look like and what expectations can look like. And I'd like to thank staff for the work that's been done both practically and in putting the information in this report and in the appendices and attachments together. But I'd also particularly like to thank the community members who've taken their time to come along today and give us their first-hand experience of what living with this stench is like. And I hope that those people that did come along and present to us so passionately can see that what you've told us has made a difference both to our discussion and to the resolutions and to what happens next. Requesting that staff bring an update to Council and Finance and Performance on a fortnightly basis means that there will be regular public updates on this matter. And for me, it's clear from this report that the scale of the problem is massive, that some quick fixes that people might have hoped would be possible are not as practical as we might first think. But it's also good that through the report, the updated attachment and the discussions this morning, we've considered those in a public environment. It's also clear that a huge amount of work has been done to date, and a lot of thinking and planning around immediate next steps has been going on as well. But it's also clear that now we need to move quickly to resolve this, to pull out all the stops to make sure that we do so quickly, effectively, and safely. And I'm totally supportive of doing whatever it takes to achieve that as quickly as possible. Leanne, did you want to close the debate?
Yes, I'll just close it off. There's just a couple of things I'd like to say, I guess in response to some comments that have been made. Councils are a creature of statute. We are obliged to follow the requirements of the Local Government Act 2002. We do not have the right to expend budget that we haven't got on our long-term plan or on an adjusted budget that has gone through due process. The acceptance of a claim, and gosh, people in Christchurch know this better than anywhere else, the acceptance of an insurance claim is not the settlement of the claim. We haven't settled our insurance claim as of yet. I'm hoping that will be sooner rather than later, because that gives us the degree of assuredness that we need. Everyone in this city knows the difference between an insurer wanting a rebuild or a repair, and the difference in the settlement amount that relates to that debate. So we're in a situation at the moment where we simply can't act ahead of the relationship with our insurer. And our insurer said to us, I think it was in late March, so a month ago, that the removal of the filter media can begin. So the first thing that the council considered at a staff level was to exercise a delegation to make the call to go to a direct contract. Now, that was something that had to be considered by a subcommittee of staff. These protections are in place. This is against the procurement policy, so it's an exception to the procurement policy. They needed to go through legal advice, insurance advice, and they made the call in a very short space of time to go into direct negotiations. Next week we will know who that contractor is, and we know that from what we've been told already, that contractor is going to be as committed to getting the work done as quickly as possible as we are.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Thank you. So now we'll move straight to item 22, organics processing options. So if I could invite staff to the table to speak to this report, please.